Really, the only thing tying the two films today together is that they're both extremely violent and disturbing stories that are wonderfully acted. Bloody Oranges left a scar on my heart by the end. It's not your typical horror movie, but when does typical horror ever come from France? This is M.L. Miller Frights Best in Horror Countdown 2021 through 2022. Counting down the best in horror films released from October 1st, 2021 through September 30th, 2022. According to me, M.L. Miller. Here we go. Number 16. Bloody Oranges, aka Oranges Sanguines, was released March 19th, 2022. It's streaming on Shudder. It's directed by Jean-Christophe Meurisse and written by Jean-Christophe Meurisse, Amélie, Philippe, and Yohann Gloaguen. Like many reviewers, sometimes I get requests to check out films, but unlike a lot of reviewers, I focus mainly on horror films, and a lot of PR folks don't know that. So I get these emails asking me to review scintillating dramas or poignant documentaries or even rowdy comedies, and I feel like writing them back with a snarky remark because obviously these folks don't follow my reviews. I just somehow got on their email list. But of course I don't do that. I write back, kindly explaining that I focus predominantly on horror, and sometimes I get a response from the PR folks apologizing for the miscommunication. Then there are other times when the PR rep writes me back and says, "Oh, don't worry, this may look like a drama or a comedy or whatever, but it's dark." But dark is a relative concept. Sometimes these people don't know the depths of some horrors I've seen. So still, I tread lightly into the film, hoping there's some kind of horrific aspect to it, enough for me to justify covering it, and not the 101 other horror films released out there screaming for my attention. But sometimes a film comes along that definitely qualifies as horror, but also crosses genres in such an all-encompassing way that I want to kick myself for almost overlooking it. That's the type of film Bloody Oranges is. Bloody Oranges is a pitch-black French drama, comedy, horror film that follows the life of a handful of seemingly banal and unrelated people. A secretary of finance in the French government attempts to cover up a money laundering scam. An elderly couple tries to win a dance contest in order to pay off an ever-increasing debt. A young girl contemplates losing her virginity at an upcoming party. A lawyer is obsessed with how he appears and where he sits in terms of social status. All of these seemingly normal people, just living their lives, are somewhat absorbed with their own plights and ignorant to the fact that their lives are about to interconnect in strange, disturbing, and downright harrowing ways. The film opens with a scene heavy on dialogue where a group of people talk quickly with and over one another about a dance contest. It's the kind of fast-talk bickering you'd see in an Aaron Sorkin script or a Curb Your Enthusiasm episode, where the temperament of the conversation increases in pressure to the boiling point. As with those types of conversational style stories, the comedy comes from how increasingly bombastic everyone becomes as an argument persists, and this is exactly the type of comedy that makes up the heart of Bloody Oranges. It's through these exchanges that some of the best bits of comedy appear in this film. For quite a bit, I was smiling as the narrative flitted from one scene to the next. Yet I was still wondering why the hell was I, a horror reviewer, watching this movie. And then the 50-minute mark came, and holy poopin' crap does this thing veer into the darkness very quickly. I'd rather save the surprises for those brave enough to give Bloody Oranges a chance, but while the first half attempts to show how our disagreements, transgressions, hopes, and dreams can come up lacking or highlight what is actually charming about a person, the latter half highlights how easily all of what we think is normal can be shattered on one bad day. The result is heartbreaking, shocking, daring, and the stuff that Hollywood movies don't have the guts to touch anymore. Yes, there's a definite Tarantino edge to Bloody Oranges, but the story is less involved in paying homage to Z-movie tropes and more interested in highlighting the victories and defeats we all experience in life through one very perverted lens. What makes Bloody Oranges work is that for almost the full first hour, we get to know the inner turmoil of our protagonists. That's what makes the last 40 minutes so soul-shredding. Christophe Péau plays the perfectly polished politician with many secrets, but he's got a lot of clout and friends to help him keep these secrets covered. He displays a charm that you only see in political theater and is perfectly cast in the role. The plight of the elderly couple is devastating, especially when you see how much they enjoy dancing together. But the true standout is Lilith Grassmug, who plays the starry-eyed Louise, who is eager to grow up, but is not prepared for what horrors life has to offer. It's the beauty of these fully realized characters that hit me so hard when the bad stuff starts happening. If you come away from this film not feeling endeared to these characters, then shocked, and then moved to the point where your heart feels like it's squeezed in a vice, then you'd better check your pulse. As touching the comedy and dramatic moments are, have no worry that this film gets extremely disturbing in the latter half. Filmmaker Jean-Christophe Meurisse is able to capture the humanity through rapid-fire conversation and then challenges that humanity to its core by intertwining the plight of this cast like ivy through a fence. He seamlessly cuts from one story to the next and back again, and somehow makes the entire film feel like a rich experience with moments that sear itself into your soul and refuse to leave your mind. Bloody Oranges is a celebration of absurdist humor, the unpredictability of plans, the nihilistic inevitability of life, and still manages to douse the credits with a dash of hope and righteous violence. I highly recommend you check out this French gem yourself. It won't be for the blockbuster crowd, but if you don't mind the unconventional, the controversial, the unsettling, and the unique, this is a film for you. I'm so glad I took a chance with Bloody Oranges, and I recommend you do so too. Once For the Sake of Vicious gets rolling, it never stops, and it left me breathless by the end. For the Sake of Vicious was released on January 6th, 2022. It's streaming on Shudder. It's directed and written by Gabriel and Reese Eveneshen. Overworked nurse and single mom Romina, poor Agnes's Laura Burke, comes home to find her landlord and shady businessman Alan, played by Colin Paradine, unconscious on her kitchen floor, and a stranger standing over him. This stranger is Chris, played by Nick Smith, a rage-filled father who accuses Alan of abducting and raping his daughter. After torturing and attempting to force a confession out of Alan, Chris has shown up at the nurse's home to make sure Alan doesn't die before confessing. But Alan breaks free and messages his very dangerous associates. Armed with a single handgun and a hammer, Chris and Romina have to fight for their lives against a gang of masked bikers hired to make sure no one gets out of the house alive. For the Sake of Vicious is a brutal film, freight training through the opening credits and right on down the track until the final crawl. It's a film that pulls no punches and takes no prisoners. No one is safe, no one has plot armor, and no one dies easily. The goal to up the body count often takes away from the realism in most horror films. People are stabbed or shot and immediately fall dead. That's not the case in For the Sake of Vicious. This film understands that the human body can take quite an amount of punishment before expiring, and while the cast might be relatively small, this film doesn't measure its carnage in body count. It does it in hits and stabs, shots and crashes. While there are some talky bits in between the bloodshed, For the Sake of Vicious offers long stints of grunts, growls, gasps, and groans as its sole dialogue. In the world of unrealistic Tarantinoian monologues, it's kind of refreshing to enjoy the long silences in dialogue and simply witness the gorgeous dance of bodies colliding into one another with the worst of intentions in mind. For the Sake of Vicious is not for the squeamish or sensitive. It's a harrowing experience, reminiscent of the raw emotion last seen in Panos Cosmatos and Nick Cage's revenge epic Mandy. And speaking of Nick Cage, star Nick Smith, who plays Chris, is the spinning image of a young Nick Cage. He even goes over the top, and then some, just like Cage himself. His co-star, Laura Burke, is equally fantastic. She delivered one hell of a performance in Poor Agnes as a female serial killer. Here she easily portrays the middle ground conflict of not knowing who to believe in this argument. Her frustration is palpable for most of the film, and when asses need to be kicked, she isn't afraid to dive into that either. Finally, Colin Paradine may spend most of the time bound and gagged in a chair, but I have to point out how powerful his performance is, as he simply offers up looks, gasps, and glances alone. This is a wonderfully nuanced performance with very little dialogue. All around, the acting in For the Sake of Vicious is top drawer. For the Sake of Vicious has a simple plot. One man is out for revenge against another, with one woman in between them attempting to rationalize it all out. Once the stances are explained, the film simply lets the conflict play out through brutal action, not discussion. Some might criticize this film for a threadbare plot, but for me, it's not lacking in plot. The plot is quite powerful, but it just doesn't need a lot of explanation or wordplay. Both Alan and Chris are at an impasse. Chris thinks Alan raped his daughter. Alan denies it. And no matter how much torture occurs, nothing changes. Sure, there could have been an hour of chit-chat attempting to get to the bottom of things. Instead, For the Sake of Vicious communicates the point that once violence occurs, it doesn't matter what is said. Once we give in to simple animal instincts, discussion really leaves the dojo. And that's what happens in this film. All reasoning and level-headedness is spent by the time we catch up with the characters of this story, and that leaves us with pure emotion, relentless brutality, and the sole goal of survival taking center stage. For the Sake of Vicious is absolutely gory, never turning away from the violence, but bearing full force into it. It's not a thinking man's film, it's a pure feeling man's film, where everything is a result of frayed and spent emotion. It may be one of the more violent films I've seen in ages, but the violence is tied to the desperation and frustration felt by the characters involved. Yes, it's front and center, but there is definitely a point to it all. If you're looking for a hard-edged, tension-filled gauntlet of blood, bullets, blades, and body parts, For the Sake of Vicious is the revenge-fueled hurricane you're looking for. As always, feel free to agree, disagree, or give me your own picks for your favorite horror movies. It's October, so let's talk horror. Come back tomorrow for the next level in the Best in Horror Countdown 2021 through 2022. Be sure to hit all of the pertinent bells and whistles down below, and you'll never miss a post. Happy Halloween, folks.